Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I have the opportunity to work on one of a few reels that were dropped off recently. These were dropped off by Tim, and we previewed these earlier. These are Shimano's. This one is a Shimano Spheros SW6000. It's a beautiful reel, and we're going to show you how to take this one apart, how to service it, and how to keep it fishing. So we're going to start by taking off the exterior pieces and parts. And as we do, I want to encourage you to subscribe to my channel. And if you do subscribe to the channel, if you like the art of reel repair, if you like to see how reels are made, their strong points and their weaknesses, and how to service them, well, then subscribing and using the notification button is the best way to do that. Well, I've just removed the spool, and we're going to continue taking off parts, but one of the things I'd like to do as a suggestion is to tell you, if you don't know the reel, if you're unfamiliar with it, go out to the internet. There's a couple of sites out there. Reelschematic.com is one where you can go and find the schematic for the reel. That's a burst diagram of the reel. It'll show you how that reel is, pieces and parts, and if you need to order them, they have a broken one or one needs to be replaced. They have a parts numbering down here that will enable you to order parts. So always get that if you don't know. And the other suggestion I have is to take pictures along the way. If you take those pictures, they will help guide you when it comes time to reinstall. This one should just pull off. It does. There's a series of little washers and things in there. If you can keep them nested, that's fine. If not, you can go to the parts diagram to find out a little bit more about where they belong in sequence. When I take those parts off, if they're not large, I put them into a parts tray, and that parts tray enables me to keep track of where they are so that when it comes time to reinstall, well, I know where they go back to. That parts tray is the bottom of a fast food container. All right, well, we're going to remove the rotor now. And one of the things that's interesting here is I got a different screw. Now, I don't know if this reel was serviced in the past and, well, the screw just needed to be replaced or was lost, or if it's something more than that. Well, I'm looking at the schematic and it tells me that the handle just simply unscrews, but you know what, I don't necessarily trust that, so I'm just going to remove the cap here and make sure that we don't have a screw holding in the main gear, and we don't. Some of these reels have that screw, and if you go twisting away, well, you can break the handle or break the body or break the main gear or something else. This one's probably just over tightened, and that's why I wanted to do it with the rotor on, because you can manage to take that off easier than if you have the rotor off and you remove the anti-reverse and the like. This has a lot of ball bearings in it. There's one under the handle here, so while I have that, I'm going to just kind of oil it up, and we'll put that off to the side as well. Again, if it's a bigger part, not as much of an issue. I've tested this before. Everything works. This is a manual bail. It is not an automatic trip bail. And we're going to go ahead and take the three screws off that hold the cap that holds the rotor nut. I leave them on my desk. I've already noted that I have a flat-headed screw here. Again, I don't know if that's by design. I guess I could look at the schematic and see if there's a different screw there, or if it's just a replacement screw. Regardless, we'll take those and put those into a section of my basket, and then we can remove the piece. And now we're going to remove the rotor nut. If you're looking at the rotor here, it says unscrew in that direction, which is a clockwise manner. So take your 15mm nut or wrench, work the nut, and when you break it, I like to remove it by hand from there rather than using the wrench the whole way. Notice you have a little packing plastic piece on top of that nut. That's going to hold that rotor and that axle shaft in place. So make sure you note that when that's being taken care of there. All right, you can see the rotor just falls off at that point. While we have that, as I mentioned, this is a manual trip. There is a little bit of a ramp there, but what you want to do on a manual trip is you want to make sure that your seams are oiled, and there should be a bearing in here, so just flood that area with a bearing with the oil as well. We're going to come up top now. There's 3 screws here. Again, a good point to remind you to take pictures along the way as you start to remove these pieces and parts. Well, sometimes it can get hectic. Sometimes you may even miss a little piece that you just assumed you're going to remember. And when you do that, well, the problem that happens is when you go to reinstall, you might be missing the part or the sequence or the orientation, and a picture will help you get you back on track. Well, there's 3 of them that are holding this cap on, and then I'm expecting to see an anti-reverse clutch underneath here. Those 3, I'm going to just put another area of my parts, and we can pull this up. One of the ways you know it's a manual bail is you do not find a trip lever or a ramp along the way that would kick that up. Okay, I think this should just come out now. That greater cap is also holding your clutch on. When you open up this clutch, there's a screw here. Don't remove that. There's an O-ring underneath it. And again, just keep these in a sequence, however you choose to do that. And the top, I think for the most part, there might be a rumble strip here. I'm thinking there should be an anti-vibration strip. There is. And you usually need to take that, it's like a large rubber band. And you usually need to take that off before you can split the case. Be careful with it. It is rubber. If it's an older reel, it will get brittle. And then we also have that collar. Now this is a mistake that a lot of folks make on the reinstall. You'll notice that that collar has 2 different diameters. It has a narrow diameter and a thicker diameter, top and bottom. The thicker diameter belongs up top. And if you had taken pictures, you would see that. Thicker, thinner, up top. Okay, we can go down now, and I think the next piece that we want to do is open up the case, and then we want to take our bearing out here. We've got a little bit of an unusual approach to that axle shaft. If I remember, it's kind of a hooked thing, and the easiest way to remove that is with a pin and a pull through. Well, it surprises me. I thought that there was one more piece there. There's not. A lot of times Shimano will bury a nut up here in the handle that needs to be removed for that. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. This last screw is holding on a post that that axle shaft rides on. So be careful as you're doing this. As you're removing it, make sure that you are aware that some pieces along the way can fall out. Okay, when you do this now, you want to note the sizes of the screws and the locations of the screws. I was in one Shimano reel recently where there were 4 screws and 3 of them were different sizes. So take your time with this. And what I like to do is I like to just remove them, put them on my desk for comparison. And if there is one or the other that's longer or shorter, I like to know where they go. Otherwise, you risk putting the wrong one in a slot, and it sometimes will not have the reach it needs. Sometimes it will be interfering with something. Like that screw that just came out here is longer than the screw we took from this side. Let's see if the trend continues. This one's going to be holding on a plate, so be aware of the one on the lower side here. And like I said, that plate, I believe, is a shim or a stop for a bar that the axle shaft crosswind block situation rides up and down on. Okay, so those 2 on the left side are correct. So these 2 are the same, that one's longer, and then I think these are altogether different as well. I think there would be some consistency in this. So there's 2 more of these. So it's interesting that that cover cap really just keeps all of this tied down. It keeps your pinion gear tied down, it keeps your anti-reverse clutch tied down, and it acts as a shield for the water. Okay, I think we should be able to remove this now. Maybe not, that might still be tight. Yeah. Alright, that one's loose now. Whenever you're doing something like this, don't force it. If you force it, generally what's going to happen is something bad. You'll break a case or warp a case or something. Just going to see if I can get these out. If not, they'll fall out eventually, but I don't like it when they fall out and hit the floor and then you got to go search them. There you go. So we were talking before about 4 screws. 3 of them different. We got 5 screws and 3 patterns. So the long ones go up top. The medium one goes over here. The 2 shorter ones go to this side. Well, we should be able to remove this now. Okay, and this is your Shimano open end side. Nice metal, heavy metal side. We have a bearing and a shim washer there, and notice that shim washer, if you didn't notice it before, it belongs on the bearing side, and it goes on top of the main gear. Let's go back and do this now. You want to bring this down so that you can remove your axle shaft. That's held in place by this Phillips head screw. Good place to take a picture again before you've done anything. Now most of the time you need to remove the axle shaft before you remove the main gear. That seems to be the case here. We'll show you why in a moment. You should be able to pull your axle shaft up. I'm going to get the axle shaft and that screw. I'm going to put that screw right back into the axle shaft there. I won't lose it that way. And there's a lot of screws going on here, so if you keep the ones that are associated together, you're in better condition. Notice that whole pinion gear piece came up. That's fine. Your main gear comes out next. There's a little bearing just came out that belongs in here. Now we have like that window, right? You can just, this whole thing can just slide over, if I remember, just like that. That's the post that it rides on. When you go to reinstall a post, you need to make sure that that post is flush in here. If it's not, that's not going to ride correctly. And then we have the gear underneath, and we have a little brass or copper or some kind of metal sitting there. Interestingly enough, we have a plastic bushing on the back side of this reel. Okay, what you want to do with your servicing is basically inspect your pieces and parts, make sure that they're all clean, that they're free from defect, that you want to make sure that they don't have dirts and grease and oils and built up in there. Then you can kind of work backwards from that. Oh, same thing, we want to check all those teeth. Now, I'm not seeing any indication of dried greases and the like, but if you had it, go ahead and grab a brush. Kind of toothbrush would be fine. This is a hard brush, came in a brush assortment. I think it had a wire brush, and a copper or brass brush, and a hard brush. You can use a toothbrush. Most of the time I don't go beyond that kind of grit anyway. I'm going to clean that up, clean up the back end of this. The case is clean. And we can kind of take these as we're doing this, go ahead and just kind of work to reinstall so that you don't have your pieces and parts laying all over the place. The crosswind block, or gear, handles the crosswind block, handles the main gear. It's driven by the main gear in the back. And so you get grease on all 3 sides of this, and you get grease inside the stud. When you do that, then go ahead and put that right down onto the post and make sure that you're in the bottom position there for that. when you do that, you can then come on over and, well, since that's flopping, you want to raise it so that you can catch the stud. Well, there's a second way to do this, which is what's happened here with that pin coming out. So go ahead and put your crosswind block in, feather in the pin, and again, remember that this pin needs to be flush to the bottom of this corner here, not extended. All right. The reason why we had to remove the axle shaft is because the main gear cannot pull out with the axle shaft riding between those two gear drives. So what you want to do is install the main gear before you reinstall your axle shaft. If you got ahead of yourself there, you're going to find out you can't get the main gear in. Okay, we're just doing the same thing here. A good amount of grease. You don't have to get it overflow with grease. If you do, what's going to happen is centrifugal force is going to just push it out of the way. And well, pushes it out of the way, it's no use to anybody, right? All right, we're going to put the main gear in. Well, I guess we should put the pinion gear in first. It's always a little bit easier to do it that way. I'm going to do the same thing with the pinion gear. Well, I have that ball bearing out. I'm going to oil that one. Do the same thing. Inspect it. Go ahead and get your hard brush if it needs a cleaning. I like to brush it onto a paper towel. That way the old greases don't get transferred back on. We'll go ahead and grease the pinion gear. Use fishing reel grease, please. I mean, I get all kinds of suggestions. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. It's your reel. But if you want to preserve it and get the maximum out of the service that you're performing, use the grease. An example of that, I get questions all the time about Vaseline. Can you use it? The answer is you can use it. It is a petroleum jelly. It's going to not have the same marine properties. I guess it's good for baby diapers, and I guess it'll keep the baby somewhat dry, but if you can, please take the moment, go buy the fishing reel grease. It's not that expensive, and it's designed for fishing reels, not baby's bottoms. Okay, we've oiled that bearing. We've put it back onto your pinion gear. You saw how I put the bearing into this carrier here after it was oiled, and now we can just set that whole assembly up, just like that. Be careful now as you're turning this in and out and around. This may fall out again, so you just want to be careful to hold it as you complete the bottom end of the assembly. Your main gear goes in next, and again that's in a bushing. Go ahead and take that axle shaft now. I'm going to remove the tie down screw for that. I'm going to wipe that shaft off. I'm going to make sure it's nice and smooth and clean. Sometimes if the reel's been sitting a while, you're going to find out that it has dried grease on it. Look for the flat side of the axle shaft. That's going to face forward as you go through. And then you can put that into your crosswind block like that. And you align the hole in the axle shaft with the hole in that crosswind block. Next up is that little screw. And those of you that know me probably know that it's probably time for a trip to the coffee shop or wherever to wait for me to put these screws back in. That one was relatively painless. Okay, you can turn this now, make sure everything's working, which it is, works nice and smooth. And then you can put the cover back on. This has got an O-ring. If you can't see it, it's not an O-ring, it's an extended ring seal. Make sure it's all in its track when you go to do that. I noticed that the shim washers for the main gear are just kind of not aligning properly, so let's take them off. This one has 3 in it. The reel that you have may or may not have 3. It may have 1, may have 2, may have 3. Those are designed to keep the main gear true in its performance. All right, now this is the time for the test, right? We said that we have different size screws here. We have 5 screws in 3 different patterns. Do you remember where they are? If you don't, then go back to your pictures or go back in the video. I kind of remember where they are, but I don't always. We have 2 long screws that go up top. We have 2 smaller screws which go to the left side if you're looking at the reel. And we have 1 longer screw which goes on the other side. We're going to do 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom to hold the case firm. If you don't have a tight seam on your case, if you're noticing that there's a gap here, don't go keep tightening these away. Go back and make sure that you've seated the case properly. If you don't, well, it's not going to, chances are it's not going to reel properly because something is jammed in there that, well, just quite honestly shouldn't be jammed. All right, I'm using hand tools. Sometimes people ask, can they use the mechanical screwdrivers? You know, I don't have the hand strength, I have arthritis, I have whatever the questions may be. My suggestion is, I'm kind of opposed to them. I don't like the torque in them. I've seen reels come in with shattered side plates or over-torqued side plates because of that. But if you need it, I would tell you on the outbound side, not hard. You go ahead and use it. You're not going to risk too much damage there. On the inbound side, please leave it short. Just, you know, go down, maybe leave it with a 1/16 of an inch or something to go, and then come back in and use your hand strength for those final few turns. That way you'll ensure that you have the right tension and have not over-torqued the reel. Okay, we've got that in. We've got 1 more, which was the shortest of the 3 set, which goes up top there. And that's how those screws go back in. This one's kind of a blend of fishing reel technologies. I'm not sure quite when it came out. Most of the anti-reverses today are not that bigger set that we just saw there. All right, let's take the bump cover and put that back on. That's called a bump guard. It's there so that if you bump something with the bottom of your reel, you fracture this, kind of weakest link theory, as opposed to fracturing the body of the reel. It's not just there as a pretty face. All right, we have that big rubber ring goes next. And it's elastic or stretchable, pliable, whatever the right term might be. You want to make sure that you get it over there. Don't, if you can, avoid using the screwdrivers or tools or something like that that may or may not rip the ring apart. If it does, you're going to have to go find another ring. And then one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure it gets seated into the slots. All right, that's that. Next up then, we want to seat our O-ring first. That goes around the outside of this. Okay, with the O-ring secured, let's get the collar for the anti-reverse. Remember, the wide side goes up. Let's seat that in. And on this anti-reverse clutch, notice you have the 2 studs there. They want to go into the holes. Seats like that. If you can't turn it, you've got them in the hole. If you can turn it, well, then you don't. Next up, you want to get your cap. Now this cap, I'm not sure if these are symmetrical. I don't think they are. As I'm looking at this, it looks like there's a greater space on this side than on this side. So make sure you get your holes lined up. I think I just got lucky there putting it in. We'll see. Start your screws. And then the same thing that we did on that cover on the outside. In this case, you're going to get even torque because it's just basically a triangular shape. What I like to do is start the first one but not tighten it down, just to make sure that I don't bind that cap. Just finish tightening up those screws then. Make sure that it seats nicely. And we can go ahead and install that rotor next. Have our rotor comes up. There's a flat side to that pinion gear, so make sure you're on it. And then go ahead and install your nut. Remember, it came out in a clockwise manner, so it goes back in a counterclockwise manner. Tighten that down. You've got your little shield on top of it there. Once you've tightened down the nut, take your cap and align that. If it doesn't align perfectly, I just got lucky there. If it doesn't align perfectly, then what you want to do is just back it off or tighten it up just a little bit more to get those so that your screws are held down. All right, we'll come in now. Unfortunately, I did not mark the spot for that oddball screw. So I don't think it matters. I think it's a replacement screw. It's a chance it isn't a replacement screw. But we'll see if it affects the performance at all as we go forward in our test. That's 2, and here's the third one. There was a flat-bladed screwdriver screw. So let's go ahead and get that one done. Just need the right blade for it. There you go. Okay, that's the bottom end of the reel. We have that little cap set that we had pulled off earlier. And there's a little shim washer that went on top of that. Alright, so we're done with the bottom end other than installing the handle. Let's go ahead and put that handle back on. At this point you can oil the little pivot point there. That'll help you keep it kind of free from rust or corrosion or the like. Let's go over to the spool then and service that side. And the spool is held in by kind of a crossed tension spring. You want to find the part that has the separation in it. Go ahead and use a screwdriver or something to back that out. I recommend holding your finger on that so that that spring, which sometimes is under a lot of pressure, doesn't pop and get lost in the process. And then you can generally just turn these out. Make sure that the cavity is clean. This is a nicely cleaned cavity. Sometimes you'll find that there's an accumulation of water and debris in there. This is a traditional 6 washer set. The washers are in good condition, and the way that it works is you start with a drag washer. These look to be Carbon-Tex. You don't need to do anything with those. The first is a keyed washer. It's got a rectangular center to it. Put the second drag washer in. You have what's called the eared washer. They have the tabs on both sides and a big circular center there. Last of the drag washers. And you have the top washer. Now if those are dirty, you want to take a hard brush like we did with the gear system and just scrub them down. If they're missing that cross hatching completely, it means they're worn. And if they're worn, you need to replace those. But the process is the same in terms of removing them and putting them back together again, whether you're replacing, cleaning, or just inspecting. And then you've got it reset just like that. Go ahead and put that back on then. Tighten up your adjuster. Well, if you have any questions on this reel or any reel, if you leave them in the comment section, I'll try and help you out with them. Just it's the best way to reach me, is to leave a question in the comment section. It doesn't have to be on this reel, but I do try to answer those in the morning. All right, I've tightened it. They're holding beautifully. And back those drag washers off when you're not using them. That way you're not pressing out anything. You're not having it act as a vise to compress the drag washers and shorten their life. Let's give it a test. Very nice. Running nice and smooth. This is a manual bail, as I mentioned. So if you do this, you're just going to do this all day. It's not going to work. And on a 6000 and above, these are manual bails. That's the service of the Shimano Spheros SW6000 fishing reel. I hope you've enjoyed that. To our first responders and essential personnel, thank you for all it is that you do to keep us safe. To everyone, please stay safe, have a great time fishing, and have a wonderful day. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.